Hello, and welcome to Tim's Reflections from Ohio, a YouTube video series where we talk about and reflect on parables that Jesus told, stories he told, as well as just general stories from his life. And today, in this video, we're going to talk about and reflect on a passage from John chapter 13, and I'll begin reading in verse 13 and read down through verse 17. And we read these words. Jesus is talking. He says, "You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your teacher, Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them." As I read these verses recently, I was thinking about that, specifically verse 15. Jesus said, "For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you." And here he was specifically talking about the foot washing. He had earlier in the chapter, he had washed the disciples' feet. We read how that Peter did not want him to wash his feet. He actually said, "You shall never wash my feet." And Jesus said, "If I don't wash you, you have no part with me." Peter then said, "Lord, not my feet only, but my hands and my head." And Jesus said, "He who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you." So we have this, Jesus is referring to the foot washing. He's saying that I've given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. But I was thinking about this. I was thinking about some other examples that Jesus left for us. And I jotted down 5 of them that came to mind quickly. And one of them is forgiveness. When Jesus was hanging on the cross, he prayed to his Father. He said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." He was being crucified. From what I've heard and read, it was a terrible way to die. Very painful, agony, excruciating pain. But even in the midst of that pain, he thought about forgiving. And he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The second example he left for us is serving others. And here we had just read where he washed the disciples' feet. He served them by washing their feet. But other ways he served people throughout his life on this earth. There was a couple of instances where the people had been out listening to him teach, and they had gone a long time without eating. He provided them food. He served them food so they could feel their need for nourishment and food. And then there was his obedience to God. Throughout his whole life on this earth, he was obedient to his Father in heaven. He was obedient to the Father's will for his life. And number 4, there was prayer. Jesus was faithful and consistent in prayer, and he left us an example. There's a story in the Bible where on the Sabbath day, Jesus had been teaching, and that night he had healed, I think it was Peter's mother-in-law, and people came out from all around and brought people that were sick for him to heal, and he was busy way into the night. But it said early the next morning, he was up and gone, spending time with his Father in prayer. And the 5th thing I wrote down, the 5th example that he left for us is love. He loved us. He loved the people. He loved his Father. And he showed that in everything he did. His love was exemplified in everything that he did on this earth. So for our reflection today, let's think about these 5 things. Jesus left us an example that we should follow it. Forgiveness. How well do we do at forgiving? Do we hold grudges? Some of us are serious grudge holders. Do we let go of those things? Do we forgive and move on with the people who have hurt us? Or do we hold on to that anger and that animosity and that bitterness let it fester in our lives. Jesus forgave. Serving others. How well do we serve others? Are we servants, or do we want others to serve us? Obedience to God. Are we obedient to God in everything that He asks of us? Or are we partway obedient? If it's convenient, yep, God, I'll do it. But if it's not, God, you're asking too much. I can't do that. I'm not doing that. Prayer. How faithful are we in our prayer time? And I may have mentioned this in an earlier video, but there was a man back in the 1800s. I think he died in the early 1900s. His name was E.M. Bounds. He wrote multiple books on prayer. But they say that in the last few years of his life, he would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and pray until 7 every morning. That's 3 hours of prayer. That's serious praying. How much time do we spend in prayer? I know there were times where I set a goal for myself of praying 15 or 20 minutes in the morning, and you close your eyes and you pray, and it seems like it's been a long time, and you open your eyes and sometimes it's been like 5 minutes. But if we get into serious prayer, time passes and we don't even realize it. And lastly is love. Do we have love for other people? Do we have love for our neighbors? Do we have love for that person who's standing with a sign by the street and says, the sign says, unemployed, need food, or need money for food, or need money for lodging, whatever it is? Do we have love for them? Or do we just pass them by and pretend we never saw them? Jesus said, I left you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Jesus did all these things. He forgave us. He continues to forgive us. He serves us. He was obedient to God. He prayed for us, and He loves us. Do we do these things for other people? That's the question for us today, something for us to reflect on. How well do we do with this list? Forgiveness, serving, obedience to God, prayer, and love. Think about your life. Pray about it. And then whatever adjustments, corrections that God leads you to make them. Don't go back, but move forward with God in sync with Him, loving Him and obeying Him. That's it for today. If you've been blessed by the reflection, please hit that thumbs up button. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so that you'll receive notification as new videos come out in the future. I hope you have a blessed week. And remember, if you forget everything else, remember this. Remember that God loves you, and He loves you so much that He sent His Son to die on that cross for you and for me.